Kia ora, good morning everyone, Richborn here. Today we are going to have a look at this Fujifilm XF16-55 f2.8 RLMWR2. This is the new f2.8 constant aperture standard zoom lens for Fujifilm X users. It replaced the original XF16-55 f2.8, which is a very well-respected lens. Before we start, I want to tell you that the lens I used in this review was loaned from Fujifilm New Zealand for this review. I have also borrowed the original XF16-55 f2.8 from them as well, so I can do some comparisons in this video. The first time I saw this new XF16-55 f2.8 Mark II lens was at the XM5 launch event here in New Zealand a couple of weeks ago. Fujifilm has this new version and the original 16-55 f2.8 side by side, and I was really surprised by the size of this new version. Even though the focal length range, the maximum aperture are exactly the same between this new and the original version, this new Mark II version is noticeably smaller than the original version. And it's not just the size. The new version is also significantly lighter than the original version. The original version's weight is around 655 grams, which isn't too bad for a f2.8 zoom lens. But the new version, the Mark II version, is only 410 grams, which is almost 40% lighter. If you pick up these two lenses, you will immediately notice the big difference. Just to give you a bit more idea, this Mark II version is only 10% heavier than the XF 16mm F 1.4 RWR, which is a prime lens. The filter size of this new version is also reduced from 77mm to 72mm. But with all the reduction in size and weight, it does make me curious and also a bit nervous if there will be any major compromise in terms of image quality, and we will look at that in this review very soon. The focus ring is at the front of the lens, and then the zoom ring in the middle, and the aperture ring at the back. When you zoom in the lens would extend a bit just like the original version. Both the zoom and the focus ring are quite smooth. This Mark II version's aperture rings click feels softer than the original version. When you turn the aperture ring on the original version, the clicks feels quite a bit more crispy. I can't say which version feels better. If you prefer softer clicks, then you will like the new version. But on the other hand, some of you might prefer the original versions if you prefer the clicks are more noticeable. However, the Mark II version has two new features that the original version doesn't have. First, there is a switch on the lens for you to choose between click or declick mode. So for videographer, you can just declick the aperture ring very easily and you can have smooth aperture adjustment. While there are some other lenses in the market that have similar feature, this is the first time we see this feature on a Fujifilm lens, and I would definitely like to see this on more Fujifilm lenses in the future, as everything is moving more towards hybrid these days. And the second thing is, there is also a button that you have to press if you want to change the aperture ring from the minimum aperture f22 to A position or vice versa. And I love this design. When you are stopping down the lens, you won't accidentally change from the minimum aperture to A position, which can be any aperture value. If you have watched my recent Viltrox 135mm lab lens review, you may remember I have complained a bit about this issue with that Viltrox lens. The user can accidentally change from minimum aperture to a large aperture when shooting with that Viltrox lens. So this shouldn't be a problem with this new Fuji lens. This new lens is also a WR lens, just like the original version, which means weather resistance. So you definitely won't have any problem if you want to shoot with this lens under a bit of rain. This lens is also Fujifilm's Pro level lens, so the build quality is excellent. It feels very solid. It feels very similar to the original version, just smaller and lighter. Autofocus performance is very good. I tested with my XH2. When shooting photos, autofocus speed is fast and it is also very smooth and quiet. I have just upgraded my XH2's firmware to the latest version 5.1 when working on this review, and when I did the video autofocus test, I'm pretty happy with the continuous autofocus performance with this combo. I know recently Fujifilm is having a bit of bad reputation with their autofocus performance, especially for video, but look at this test result. I was shooting at 55mm at f2.8 using face detection. I really think the result is not bad at all. And now let's start the image quality test. And I will be comparing this new XF16-55 f2.8 Mark II with the original version. And let's see if the new version has any improvement in terms of image quality, or if the smaller size of the Mark II results in some compromises in image quality. And let's start with the image sharpness test first. Let's look at the wide-end 16mm focal length. If we zoom into the center, the Mark II is already very sharp at f2.8. But this is the same with the original version as well. Both lenses are really sharp at f2.8, and I also don't see any sign of chromatic aberration. Since f2.8 is already very sharp, stopping down the lens doesn't really increase image sharpness. Image sharpness remains excellent until f8. After that, the lens becomes softer due to diffraction. And now let's look at the corner. The Mark II's corner is not as sharp as the center, but it is still reasonably good. If we compare it with the original version, the Mark II is noticeably sharper. Stopping down these lenses will improve the corner sharpness, and we reach the maximum sharpness at around f8. And now let's look at the telephoto end, 55mm focal length, and let's look at the center again. At f2.8, both lenses are very sharp once again. Now, while the original version's color seems quite a bit cooler, I believe it's just largely due to changes in lighting, as I shot these photos outdoor and the lighting was changing quite a bit that day when I shot these test photos. Stopping down to f4, both lenses appears to be marginally sharper, but it's really just marginally. If we stop down further, the sharpness remains the same until around f8, then diffraction kicks in and starting to soften the image. Let's look at the corner at 55mm focal length. At f2.8, both lenses' corner is acceptable, but I won't say sharp. The Mark II is slightly better than the original version. When stopped down to f4, Mark II gets noticeably sharper, while the original version only has very minor improvement in sharpness. If we keep stopping down the lens and reach f8, then the original version finally catch up in terms of corner sharpness. If you want to take close-up photos, the minimum focus distance of this lens is 30 cm at the wide end, which means around 15 cm between the front of the lens and the subject. This is pretty much the same distance as the original version. And this will give you maximum magnification ratio of around 0.1 times. This is the photo shot at the minimum focus distance at f2.8 16mm focal length. I think the sharpness is quite decent. If we switch to tele-end 55mm focal length, the maximum magnification ratio is increased to around 0.2 times. This is quite a bit better than the original version, which has a longer minimum focus distance at 55mm focal length. And now let's have a look at the bokeh rendering. This new lens has reasonably good bokeh performance. Bokeh is usually quite smooth and it doesn't look too nervous. If you look at these comparison photos, both photos were shot at f2.8 from the same position. The original version's bokeh has a bit of halo ring at the outside of the bokeh balls. This is something I don't see with the new Mark II version. But apart from that, there isn't too much difference between these two lenses. With the lens profile correction enabled, both the Mark II and the original version have quite minimal amount of vignetting at 16mm focal length. The Mark II seems to have slightly more vignetting than the original version at this focal length, but the difference is very small. And this result is also very similar to what I saw when we switched to 55mm focal length. And if we turn off the vignetting correction, not surprisingly, we have more vignetting from both lenses. The vignetting is more noticeable at the wide end. If we compare the two lenses, the Mark II has a bit more vignetting than the original version, which, to be honest, is not unexpected because of the more compact size of this Mark II lens. Chromatic aberration control is very good with this new lens. I see very little color fringing in my photos. Even the very high contrast photos like this one has almost no color fringing. So you really shouldn't have any chromatic aberration issues when shooting with this new Mark II lens. In terms of distortion, if I enable the distortion correction in Lightroom, both lenses only have small amount of distortion. The original version has a little bit more distortion near the wide end, but overall I think the distortion is still quite minimal. However, if I disable the distortion correction, now I can see some pretty noticeable distortion with both lenses. Barrel distortion at the wide end and pincushion distortion at the telephoto end. This time, it is the Mark II that has slightly more distortion than the original version. Lens flare control is very good with this new Mark II version. I only got very small amount of lens flare even when I shoot directly into the sun. I have to say I really don't have any real lens flare issue when shooting with this new Mark II lens in real world. Interestingly, when I did my usual nighttime lens flare test, the Mark II does have slightly more ghosting than the original version. But both lenses' performance are very good. I don't think anyone would have any lens flare issue. And next, we'll look at the Sunstars. I did my Sunstars test at 35mm focal length, so it's pretty much the center of the focal length range. With the Mark II lens, we need to stop down to around f8 to see the Sunstars. Then Sunstars become sharper with longer tails as we stop down the lens further. At the minimum aperture f22, the Sunstars look great. And I think this Mark II lens Sunstars rendering is better than the original version. First, you need to stop down the lens a bit more to around f11 to see the Sunstars. But even if you stop down the lens further, the Sunstars from the original version is not quite as nice or as sharp as the Mark II. When I look at the result of my focus briefing test, I was really surprised by the result. I see very minimal, almost no focus briefing at all with both the original and this new Mark II lens when I change the focus between 1 meter to 20 meter. And this is the same no matter I'm shooting at the wide end or the telephoto end. I completely didn't expect this at all, so I'm pretty impressed. Okay, if we talk about the image quality, this new Mark II version delivers pretty solid performance overall. This lens is sharp, it has decent lens flare control. Sunstars and Bokeh are both a bit better than the original version. But then there are areas like vignetting and distortion, which the original version has a little bit better performance. So overall, I would say this new version's image quality is just slightly better than the original version. It doesn't mean it's bad because the original version already delivers pretty solid performance. So if you already have the original version, upgrading to the new version won't give you a huge improvement in terms of image quality, but what you will get is a much more compact and lighter lens. Also, the new Mark II version has a few really useful upgrades like the extra control for the aperture range. If you are a professional photographer or videographer that needs to carry your camera and shoot continuously for multiple hours, or maybe you are a casual shooter but you want a fast zoom lens for travel and you'll be walking around for a long time when you are traveling with the camera, then you would definitely appreciate the reduced size and weight. Some of the earliest Fujifilm lenses are getting a little bit old now, so I definitely won't complain if Fujifilm update those old lenses with similar kind of update treatments.